Hi everyone. In today's video, I am going to be talking about the pre-test post-test control group design. I will use a lot of examples to explain the research design to you, but I will also talk about the advantages and the limitations of such a design and the factors that you should be mindful of so that you can get the best possible outcomes from this research design. So before I go into it, let me just explain that the pre-test post-test control group design is also sometimes known as the pre-test post-test randomized experimental design. The reason that participants are allocated randomly into two groups. The groups are called control group and treatment group. We do a pre-testing to get a baseline data, and then we administer the treatment to the treatment group and then collect a post-treatment data from both the groups. And that way we can see whether the treatment had any significant impact on the treatment group and compare it with the control group so that we can study the effect of the treatment on the participants. Let's see how it happens with the use of some examples. So like I mentioned earlier, the participants are randomly allocated into two groups, control group and the experiment or treatment group. I will use the word treatment group here and not experiment group so that you understand that the treatment group is the group that undergoes the treatment. I will take an example and I will explain what I mean by treatment. So here we collect a pre-testing data. So that means pre-treatment or pre-testing data, pre-experiment data, where we collect data from all the participants and get a baseline data about where the participants are pre-treatment, all the participants pre-treatment. And then the control group does not undergo any treatment, but the treatment group does undergo a particular treatment. And then once the treatment is administered, data is collected again from both the groups, basically to see if the treatment had any significant impact on the treatment group. And we know that impact when we compare the data of the treatment group with the control group. So the control group undergoes a baseline data collection pre-testing. They don't undergo a treatment, and after the treatment, they should be at the same place as the baseline data. Whereas the treatment group, they do provide the baseline data, but after the treatment, they should have a significant change in them. There may not be any change, that's all right, that's also a finding of your research, but ideally this is what researchers expect. But don't ever think that the treatment needs to have a significant impact or try to alter your data to show a significant impact. Even if it doesn't have a significant impact, that's still a finding of your research. All right, so let's take an example here. So remember I mentioned that we take a group of participants and we allocate them randomly to a control group and to a treatment group. Now let's take an example here. Let's say the example here is prisoners, and these prisoners are prisoners who have violence related incidents associated with them. So they probably engaged in some kind of a violent activity either in the prison and possibly in the prison. All right. And so we collect a baseline data as to how frequently they have demonstrated a violent behavior or a violence related behavior. Then what we do is we administer a treatment. In this case, the treatment could be that we ask the treatment group to undergo a meditation for 3 months, let's say, whereas the control group does not undergo any such treatment. So the treatment group undergoes regular meditation for 3 months. Of course, you as a researcher can define what you mean by regular meditation. Maybe it's twice a day, maybe it's once a day, maybe it's 1 hour a day, maybe it's 2 hours a day. So that is up to you as a researcher, but they undergo regular meditation. And then after 3 months, you collect post-treatment data or after treatment data to again see how the prisoners are demonstrating violence related behaviors. Ideally, maybe ideally in the ideal world or perfect world, you will find that the treatment group or participants from the treatment group who underwent the meditation treatment for 3 months possibly have demonstrated lesser violence related incidents because of the meditation experience that they underwent, whereas the control group are pretty much the same. So this is a perfect research. You may find that no change has of course been observed even of the meditation. So that is also again a finding of your research. But now let's discuss what are some of the advantages or disadvantages or some of the characteristics of such a control design or a randomized experiment design. So remember, this design has probably three main characteristics. One of the characteristics is that you can assign the participants randomly. Now this can happen right before the control group and experiment group has been designed, or it can also happen after the baseline data has been collected, because after the baseline data they are still at the same level. So you may have a control group and treatment group before the baseline data randomly allocated, or you can collect the baseline data and then allocate people randomly into a treatment group and a control group. It does not matter. All right, but once of course the treatment is administered to a group, that becomes a treatment group, and the other group who have not administered the treatment or who have not undergone the treatment rather remains the control group. The second characteristic of such a research design is that both groups should be exposed to similar conditions. All right, so both groups should be exposed to similar conditions. What do I mean is that you uh, you should try to control what we call is the extraneous variables. For example, both groups should be in the same prison, undergoing the or experiencing the same kind of environment, so that you cannot identify any other factor with the impact of the meditation. So both the groups should be in the same prison, in the same location, in the same weather conditions, maybe same living conditions, something like that. All right, and then only so that you can, so that why is that? Because you can, so that you can isolate the impact of meditation on the treatment group. There should not be any other reason for that. So if you find that after meditation the violence related incidence has gone down, it has decreased, it should be purely because of the meditation treatment that you have administered, and not because that a certain group was living in better conditions and that is why they demonstrated less violence related behavior. All right, or participants for certain groups were isolated for a long period of time, they were alone for, so how would they describe or how would they demonstrate such violence related incidents? And the third characteristic is that outcome is measured simultaneously for both groups. So when you collect the baseline data, try to collect it at the same time, and then once the treatment is administered, collect the post-treatment data at the same time from both the groups. I'll tell you the reason why. So the reason is that there should not be any other factors creeping in which can be related to a lesser violence related incident or more violence related incident. So you are studying the effect of meditation on the frequency of violence related incidents. And that is the only study that should be highlighted. The findings should relate to that, not to any other factor. I will talk more about this as we proceed in the slides. All right. So participants being randomly allocated and also having pre-testing has certain advantages to this kind of a research design. Let's talk about the advantages. So before the advantages, you should know that having people randomly allocated to the groups and having a pre-testing to get a baseline data controls the threat to internal validity. Let's see how. So basically, the adding a pre-test increases the probability of detecting an effect of the treatment. Why? Because if we have a baseline data, that is the data before the treatment, and then we get data after the treatment, then we can compare it. So you can see by comparison if in this case the number of violence related incidents before the treatment was more than after the treatment, and that makes you quite confident that the meditation treatment being administered is the reason why the violence related incidents went down in the treatment group. So you can establish a direct correlation. Adding a pretest also controls the attrition bias. So what is attrition bias? Attrition bias is when, let's say after pretesting or after the baseline data is collected, you may lose some of the participants. So when you lose some of the participants, they will not complete the treatment, or they may not do the follow-up survey, that is the after treatment survey. So you will lose some of the participants. Now when you lose some of the participants, then you don't want to be scrambling for a baseline data. You don't know that the participants that are remaining, what kind of a baseline data they have, because otherwise if when you administer the meditation treatment, then you will not know the difference between it. So attrition, because collecting the baseline data helps you to determine where each of the participants lie in terms of the baseline. So even if you lose some of the participants, that's fine. You can then know, or you can administer the treatment to the other participants or remaining participants, knowing that you have baseline data about them, and then after treatment you can get post-treatment data about them and do a comparison. Of course, adding a pretest also quantifies the initial difference between the two groups. So when you collect some kind of a baseline data, it is quantifying, giving you a number, giving you something to compare with. So it is not something that that is your perception or your belief, because in research we have to back our findings with some evidence. So getting that baseline data gives you that quantification, gives you that number, gives you that evidence that you require to compare it with the post-treatment data. And finally, adding a pretest also helps analyzing the initial difference between the two groups, and allows for studying the effect of the intervention at different sub levels of the pretest. So when you have a pre-testing and then you do a post-testing, what happens is that there could be other variables that start affecting the outcome of the research. So you are trying to find if meditation has any effect on reducing the frequency of violence related incidents. Now, like I said before, the impact should only be studied between meditation and the frequency of violence related incidents. Now, having that pre-testing data helps you to identify any other factors if they could play a role in reducing the violent related incidents. For example, if in a group of participants you have many participants who have undergone some kind of, who are undergoing some kind of let's say a yoga, or they are undergoing therapy, or they are seeing counselors. So these are then variables that may have an effect on the reduction of the violence related incidents. So having that baseline data, you can identify these variables in the baseline itself, and then when you find out that certain individuals have shown a reduction in the violence related incidents, you can then exactly determine whether it was because of the meditation treatment that you administered, or is it because they were seeking therapy, or they were doing maybe yoga, or they were seeking counseling, or they were going under some kind of psychiatric treatment. All right, what else? So again, randomly allocating participants, and having a pre-testing or having a control group has more advantages. So it has advantages. Let's study the advantages. So the advantages can be classified under 5 main categories. So let's talk about selection bias. So how does it help to have participants being randomly allocated or having a control group? Is because sometimes in some research, the participants decide whether they want to undergo the treatment or not, and that can impact on the research results. So if the participants decide that, oh, none of us want to go undergo the treatment, or some of us want to undergo the treatment, then sometimes you have some confounding variables or extraneous variables that might creep into the research. But if you decide randomly allocating the participants to both the groups, then and of course you have the baseline data to determine where they were before the treatment, it helps you to convince the examiners or reviewers that the participants were randomly allocated. They did not have a hand in selecting whether they want to administer the treatment to themselves or not. The second one is maturation. Maturation means how much time period has elapsed um, between the treatment and the collection of the data. So too much time should not elapse between once you administer the data and you administer the treatment and you collect the data. That's because other variables start to creep in. Like I said, like if you finish the meditation treatment after 3 months, you should try and collect the data immediately from both the groups. Otherwise, some individuals may say that we are seeking treatment. They may also say that we are seeking counseling, we are doing yoga, we are doing, there are other people who've had an influence on the reduction of violence-related incidents, and this is not purely because of the meditation. You get the idea. History. So what does history mean? So history means what if two events are happening simultaneously. Can you control for this event? So there could be some prisoners who are not only undergoing, let's say, meditation, but they are simultaneously undergoing therapy. So that will create some confounding variables in your research, and you will not know for sure whether it was the meditation or the therapy. So then you can help to isolate. So when you randomly allocate participants and you find out later that maybe it was not the treatment that resulted in what the outcome of research, it's still randomized. You didn't control it. So it was not that you only sent the people who were seeking therapy already into the treatment, hoping that the treatment that you administer and the therapy that they are currently seeking with a professional doctor both has an effect, so that you can show an effect of your treatment on the treatment group and get the result that you want, or the prove your hypothesis. Everything is still randomized. So the reviewers and the examiners know that everything was still randomized and you did not allot participants in a way that you get the desired result. All right. Then we have testing. Testing again refers to the fact that when you do a pre-testing, the participants get an idea of what you want to achieve from them after the treatment. And sometimes they may behave in such a way, or they may claim to behave in such a way that conforms to the research, that it backs your research. They might have a good relation with you, or they might know that this is what you want to find out from them, and they may do something to support it or maybe sabotage it. In these cases, at least when you say that you have randomly allocated participants, the effect remains the same, even if they know, everybody knows it. So even if the examiner says that, oh, your pre-test is giving away the what you want to achieve from the outcome of this research, you say that still it is randomized. It is the equal. It was equal for all participants, and it was not that I created this effect for a certain group and not for the other group. Finally, we have regression to the mean. Regression to the mean means that if the pre-testing scores come out to be very good, sometimes it is hard for us to maintain that kind of performance in the post-testing. So the scores may be very close to the mean score. Again, nothing wrong with that. But again, your argument here should be that it was all randomized. You had no way of controlling this kind of performance through your experiment design. So these are the advantages of having a control group and also allocating randomly participants randomly into both the groups, because then you can justify yourself as a researcher that you were not controlling the outcome of the research or how the participants were influenced. They were all influenced similarly. Finally, we talk about the limitations of the research. So limitations is again not everyone. So although you are allocating participants randomly, not everyone in the population of interest will be eligible for the experiment. For example, you may go into a prison and you start allocating prisoners. Now, most of the prisoners, maybe many of the prisoners have not shown any violence related incidents. So they are not a good group to study. You must take all the prisoners who have demonstrated some kind of a violence related incident, so that you can then administer the treatment of meditation and find out whether it has any effect on them or not. Not everyone eligible will also be recruited. So maybe you find a group of 100 prisoners who are eligible for your study, who have all demonstrated a violence related incident. However, not everyone will agree to uh, not everyone will be able to recruit. Some of them may not be interested, or if some of them are interested, or not everyone interested will give their consent. So initially some participants may show interest, but once they come to know what your research is all about, they might not show consent, or they give their consent. And all the people who give consent may not be able to randomize them. So people who all give their consent, you never know that people who have all given their consent may be undergoing some kind of treatment, or which may create a confounding variable with your meditation. So they might have undergone meditation, they might be undergoing meditation, they might be undergoing some other kind of therapy. So it will become very difficult for you to study that it was only because of your treatment of meditation that the violence related incidents went down. And finally, the last one is that sometimes these kind of studies do not allow us to study the effect of the treatment over a period of time. Like I told you here, the data should be collected at the same time from both groups, whether it is pre-testing or post-testing, because we want to minimize the time that elapses between the treatment being administered and the collection of the data. So this cannot be like a longitudinal study where you can come back again after 6 months or 8 months and see how the group is behaving in terms of violence related incidents when you administered meditation to them many months back. So this is not a longitudinal study. You cannot see an effect of a treatment over a period of time. You can only see it at that point of time, and otherwise it becomes difficult for you to control the outcome of the research, and there will be so many extraneous and confounding variables introduced in your research that it will be difficult for you to be able to justify that it was the treatment which has led to the reduction of the violence related incidents, in this case not over a period of 3 months but also 6 months, 9 months, or 1 year. All right, so I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, please write in the comment section. I'll try to answer them, or you can write something which you don't agree with in this video, and I'm happy to accept that as well. Thank you very much for watching today's video. Please subscribe, please share, and I will see you soon with my next video. Bye for now.